Welcome to the Firehouse Yak, the podcast where the flames of knowledge and camaraderie burn bright. Your host is Peter Matthews, Firehouse's editor-in-chief. Join us as we dive into the hottest topics for firefighters and fire chiefs alike, from cutting-edge fireground operations to the fuel of motivation and leadership in the fire service. Each show features the names you know or the people you need to know as they share their thoughts and insights. Get ready for a great conversation that fuels your passion and ignites your desire to grow in the fire service. This is the Firehouse Yak podcast, where the fire service comes to talk, share, and inspire. Let's turn up the heat, or maybe just turn up that dial. Hello, welcome back to the Firehouse Yak. I'm Peter Matthews, editor here at Firehouse. Thanks again for joining us. Today is our podcast with the most guests we've had since the Veterans Day podcast back in November. And today is a special podcast because we're going to be focused on the Station Design Conference coming up in May in Reno. And we have three guests today: Janet Wilmoth, who's the conference director for Station Design Conference, Mike Scott, and then Pat Stone, who are both architects. They've been presenters, they've been authors, they're exhibitors. So we appreciate, you guys being on. And then, Pat's also a fire service background, another Long Island guy. Pat brings that unique perspective to fire station programs. So we appreciate you guys joining us. Normally I talk about housekeeping, and I'm usually focused on the Station Design Conference. We're not going to talk about that. Just real quick, the EVT, the Emergency Vehicle Technician of the Year Awards, the nominations just opened 2 weeks ago. That's gonna be open until the end of April. So if you go to firehouse.com/2026 EVT, you will be able to find a nomination form there. We're looking for nominees for the Emergency Vehicle Technician of the Year, Fleet Maintenance. And we can thank Janet for that as well. Janet brought that program to us about 12 years ago when she started with us, and she was running that before when she was a Fire Chief magazine. So we appreciate that's another unique opportunity that we have to honor those folks that are keeping those rigs on the road. And, to be able to do that is really nice because they are truly the unsung heroes. And that's Janet's words. I apologize for taking that from her. But if you do have somebody in your mechanics fleet that is worthy of the award, please do take a few minutes to nominate them. We'd appreciate that. So we're just going to jump right into the show today, and we're going to start with some intros. So, Janet, if you can just let our listeners know a little bit about yourself.
Well, I come from a family of firefighters. I ended up starting with Fire Chief magazine in 1986 after we moved back from England. And while I was at Fire Chief, we ended up starting a station style conference. And the purpose was to educate fire chiefs about what was happening in fire stations starting to change. And that came out of the Station Style Awards program. Eventually, it started to grow, and in 2013, when Fire Chief shut down, then Firehouse reached out immediately and asked if I would start a conference, a fire station design conference for them. And that's when the Station Design Conference started, 2014. That time we had 65 attendees, 11 architects, exhibitors that were attending. And now it's grown. This past year, we're up to a total of 800 attendees. And two of our key speakers are attending this call. So we're looking forward to it. This is going to be my 40th year writing about the fire and emergency services. So I'm really excited about this year's conference.
That's great. And again, it's a public safety event too, right? We started off strictly on the fire side, and now it's branched out to
Right.
fire, EMS law, public safety, emergency management. And again, the shared facilities, right? We're seeing more and more of those,
Right.
central services type buildings being built. So it really has evolved in the last 12 years, a tremendous amount, thanks to your work, Janet, and of course,
Thank you.
to Mike and Pat and everybody else that participates in the event. So, all right, Janet, thank you. Mike, can you tell us about your background, please?
Sure. I came to RM Design Group about 20, actually exactly 25 years ago, and RM had already been designing fire stations, so I feel like I got to stand on the shoulders of some giants. And I first day in, they started me working on a fire station, and as a young architect, just fell in love with the public safety service and the project type, and just been doing that ever since. Been here at RM for the last 25 years. Been privileged to be a part of the Station Design Conference, as Janet mentioned, even as it transitioned over to Firehouse. And Just very thankful that we get to serve those, not just that as architects, we get to design beautiful buildings, which fire stations give us the chance to do many times, but that we get to help those who serve us. And so it's very heartfelt for me and my team. And I'm excited. I feel like between with Pat and I, you kind of have the country bookend from California to the East Coast, and I am excited this year as the Station Design Conference is at different places throughout the country each year. We're really excited to have it in Reno, close to our home, as we serve kind of most of the West Coast.
That's great. Great point, Mike. Thanks. And again, it is interesting how stations do change, right? Again, there's just so many factors that go into it to be able to see those variations. So thanks for joining us. And Pat, let the listeners know a little bit about yourself, please.
I'm Patrick Stone. I'm with H2M Architects and Engineers. I'm a vice president here and the director of public safety. But what led to all of this craziness that goes on in my professional life is my personal life, and I had the pleasure of growing up on the floor in the firehouse. Every major party of my entire life, from birthday parties to communions to confirmations, occurred in the fire station. So shout out to Wantua Fire Department on Long Island. That's where I grew up. That's where my grandfather, the patriarch, started all of the fire service in my family. I was a member there for 10 years before getting married and moving right next door to Massapequa, where I've spent another 10 years now, a little bit over 10 years as a firefighter there, and still active and really enjoying that. So hopefully grooming my kids to do the same thing. Long Island, as many of you know, is all volunteer based. So we rely on our families and the lineage. So that all led to my career in architecture, or public safety architecture, because I was going to school. I was going to New York Institute of Technology, and one day I was talking to one of my fire commissioners, and they were like, "Oh, there's this firm coming in to look at our station. Why don't you, like, kind of hang out and bring a resume, like, see if you can get a job." And I was like, "I love H2M. I want to go." They design fire stations, so one thing led to the other. I wound up getting the job at H2M. The firm did not get the job with the fire district, which is ironic. I was the political hire gone wrong, as we like to call it. But in the long run, here I am almost 20 years later, running the public safety market for H2M, and then I'm involved in all of the fire EMS, law enforcement, EOC, anything emergency service related, public safety related projects. So that's pretty much it. That's how I got to where I am today.
Love it, Pat. Thanks again for joining us, and I'm glad you at least got the job, even if they didn't get that project. So
Yeah, yeah.
you brought plenty of business in too, so right. So it's
I like to think we both made out in the long run. So
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. I think we'd all agree. So before we begin, again, Jake Ricks over at the Hazard Class podcast, I stole this idea from him. I think it's a great way to look at it. Is a fun fact about yourself, and I think Janet last year she shared about flying on a Concorde, which I think is in the top three coolest things that I've heard so far. Because I remember growing up, I used to see the Concorde fly over our house, and so that was cool. So we're gonna go around. Pat, I'm gonna start with you this time on a fun fact, something that people may not know about you.
Thanks. Yeah. So it's funny because normally I use being a firefighter as my fun fact, but you already know that about me. So so what I was thinking about this last night, and I was talking to my son, and he was like, "Why don't you talk about being a baseball coach?" And I was like, I wouldn't have thought of that. And the irony of it is, I never played an ounce of baseball. I never even swung a bat as a kid, other than maybe like wiffle ball or something like that. And here I am now coaching my son's little league for the past few years, and I'm a manager, and I am helping in a draft, picking kids and selecting and managing their talent levels and mixing and matching kids and developing kids and teaching them how to swing a bat. I'm watching YouTube videos. I'm learning all sorts of stuff, and it's so funny. The kids have no idea whatsoever that I've never played as a kid, never watched baseball as a kid,
Oh,
and here
wow.
I am, doing my best impersonation of a baseball coach. So I'll that was his idea last night. So that's my fun fact for the day.
That's pretty cool. And coming from Long Island, I thought everybody there watches baseball. Once I left Long Island, I kind of retired from watching baseball. But
Pretty much everyone but me. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
okay, all right. Well, it's benefiting everybody now that you're coaching. So that's awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. And Mike, how about for you?
Mine's a little similar, to a little different sport. I out here in California, we don't have a lot of ice, and so when you like hockey, you put on rollerblades. And as a kid growing up, to show my age, it was actually before rollerblades were invented. So I was on the old school roller rink quad skates as a kid playing, and then as I got older and had kids of my own, I had them try it out on rollerblades, and they fell in love with it. So I wound up coaching roller hockey for about the last 10 or 12 years. And now my boys are grown up. I got three sons. They're 20, 22, and 24, and they play hockey. And one of the joys of my life is they let their dad play on their team when they do some little fun Ironman tournaments, like 3-on-3 tournaments. And
Oh, that's
uh,
great.
so uh, the joke is if dad's open in the middle and you don't pass to him, there's no ride home.
I
All
love
right, well,
that.
that's fair. That's fair. I think that's okay. It keeps you in the game, so that's great. All
That's
right,
right.
Mike, thanks for sharing that. And Janet, how about you?
I'm going to weave two things in. We've lived in five different countries around the world, and my favorite is Tokyo. And Tokyo is where I met my favorite celebrity. And I was going out for a walk, and next to the apartment next to us, a woman was walking in circled by three Japanese men. And the last one to come in was this guy, and he immediately knelt down and started talking to my daughter, and he found out he was British. And I'm like, oh boy, here's another British guy who's, dating a Japanese woman. Well, it turns out that that was John Lennon. And he
Oh,
was
wow.
absolutely fascinated talking to Janine. Janine was about 18 months old at the time. And he's sitting there saying, my son's about the same age. And I'm like, oh, wow. Yeah, I didn't know it was John Lennon. I just thought it was some British
Yeah.
guy, you know. And
Wow.
they were looking at we were on the top floor, and they were looking at the penthouse next to us. And I was like, oh, okay. And so we got downstairs, and I asked the receptionist, I said, is that, is that John Lennon? And she was like, she couldn't say. And I went, it is, isn't it? Well, there's this big limousine outside. Obviously, it was. So I asked her, I said, do you think they'll live there? And my mind was just suddenly like, wow. And she said, no, that the owner of the building would not let them because they didn't want all of the press, the commotion. And this was a building that was quiet for a certain type of clientele, but they weren't going to be included. So
Wow.
it was John Lennon.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's
that's
that's cool. That's again, yeah, you keep topping the chart, Jen. I don't like
Yeah,
that.
that's pretty cool.
Yeah. And then she jumped on a Concorde and flew over my house. So
Yeah.
okay, whatever. That's cool, Janet. Thanks for sharing. And wow, what an amazing experience to just even to think back on that from time to time. And Janine, that's cool that she got to meet him. So awesome. Well, again, thank you folks for sharing your intros and let's dive into the meat of the podcast today. So again, Station Design Conference is coming up. It's in Reno. So the one-on-one sessions, those are on May 18th. And then a conference and the exhibits themselves, they run May 19th to the 21st. So Janet, this year's theme is designing for duty. It's very simple, but it's very detailed in the long run, right? And again, that's what makes a good fire station, right? All the details that go into it. So, how did you come up with that title as you continue to encompass more than just fire station design into these or into the conference?
well, as you said before, the conference originally started out, the station design conference started out specifically focusing on fire chiefs, project managers, and officers that were designing or new or renovated fire stations. And as the years continued, our group grew, the attendance grew, we could start to see some changes coming about. It was when we were in Fort Worth for one of our conferences. It was at their training center, and they had a side also. It was for law enforcement and fire. And we had some of the law enforcement officers come over and ask if they could just sit in. And from that and their interest, we ended up partnering with Endeavor's Officer Magazine. As it's expanded, the duties and responsibilities of fire, police have expanded greatly. We see them working together a lot more. Now we're also looking, you've got EMS has their own duties. And as these responsibilities have grown, the duties have expanded. And that's pretty much part of the reason that we're now designing specifically for what they're doing, their responsibilities, which are changing. And it's kind of evolved. So designing for duty encompasses first responders, but we're also seeing public safety agencies. We've got training facilities are changing. We're starting to get emergency managers coming for emergency operations centers, and a lot of them are starting to build together. So it's the whole public safety, the whole area has really grown quite a bit. So designing for duty I think is just right on. That's exactly what we're describing, and that's what we're doing.
No, agree 100%. And again, just to see how much it's evolved. And you mentioned the training, right? How many places have incorporated training? Again, the firehouse I grew up in, it was built in 1907. They've done a lot of renovations to the place, but it's very limited, right? You can barely fit the rigs in there. Let alone, beyond the living spaces, everything else it's been updated. But to see stations now, when you go around and you see everything that's incorporated, how fortunate they are that you can do so much training in the station. But then again, when you have those campuses, and like down here in Texas, again, with land, being very ample, I've seen some pretty cool, mobile integrated health slash, fire station slash, some space for the sheriff's deputies. And again, it's great to have everybody on a campus, right? Really, how much it's evolved, it's been fascinating to see in the 12 years that I've been watching it. So Pat, I'm going to jump to you, right? Because I think, again, to kind of start the show, we just have to talk about the differences, right? So, when firefighters try out new PPE or SCBA, they do a 6-month wear trial, right? When they are looking at a rig, they can go see somebody else's relatively new rig. You can't do a wear test on a firehouse. I don't think you guys can build one real quick, throw it up, see how it is for 6 months. So, what are some of those things that the fire service may not necessarily understand about the design and build process that's different, and that's why, Station Design Conference is here.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll answer that in 1 second. I just want to make sure that I say thank you. Send a huge thank you out to Janet, and I've been working with you, Janet, for I think 15 years or so ish. Somewhere in that range now. And honestly, a major part of my career has been part of being involved with your events and with this one in particular, and just being able to technically write, present, interact, network, all of the things that came from this conference over the years, and from your mentorship, your guidance has just been amazing for me in my career. So I just would have been remiss if I didn't mention that, because I didn't get a chance to say it before. And then Peter, our recent development, and our relationship over the past I guess 2 or 3 years, just the Long Island connection, getting into some more more advanced technical writing, just being involved in these things and networking together has been amazing as well. So I just wanted to say,
I appreciate it.
Thank you to you guys.
Thank you.
So to answer your question, I use this analogy all the time when I'm interviewing or communicating with for the first time, or speaking to somebody in the industry. I tell them all the time, like, let me ask you a question. How many times has your brand new apparatus that you just spent $1.5 million on, How many times has it been in service versus out of service in the first year? Right? The question is always a roll. It's always answered with like a roll of the eyes and a, oh my God, you wouldn't, maybe 50-50. Like, how many times it went out for warranty issues, how many times there were electrical problems, this wasn't communicating with that, or this wasn't working. It happens all the time. And why is that, right? A new piece of apparatus these days, it's not the Ford or the Chevy that's been mass produced hundreds of thousands of times, right? It is unique because that department is unique. That department is adding certain specific tools and equipment and hose and and so on and so forth, right? And they're choosing, okay, well, I want this chassis and that engine and this exhaust and this PTO and I want that ladder and I want this, right? So it's a kit. It's all these different parts coming together for the first time. It's never been built that way before. They're always unique. They're always being created, right? And what happens when you have something that's unique? You don't have the Ford that's already worked out the kinks. There are going to be kinks. So what I always tell people is you need to communicate and you need to network with and you need to speak to people that have built something at least close to what you're looking to do. Where do you do that? How do you do that? Well, you do that at the show, right? You do that at the Station Design Conference. So you're going to find people that have already built something, or maybe they're in the middle of, designing something, or maybe they haven't even started yet. But everyone's at different levels and different points in their project and their process, and you can learn from all of those people. Hey, what works? What doesn't work? On Long Island. Well, we've got a lot of salt water, on Long Island, and there's a lot of floods. And well, make sure that you speak to the manufacturer. How do they handle the wiring on the apparatus so that everything is up above a certain point, so that if your axles are in the water, that there's nothing electronic at that point. What type of metal are we using down there? Right? Let's make sure it's not going to rust and corrode. So like you have these conversations, and it's so similar to the process of the apparatus design and construction. It's just like that, but obviously even tenfold, 15-fold, right? Because an apparatus, you might be looking at $1.5 million worth of parts, right? 2 million, right, worth of parts. For a new station, you could be looking at $20-30 million worth of investment. And the only way to be successful is to bring in the experts, speak to your colleagues, talk to your neighbors, talk to the people at the conference that you can network with, get as much education as possible. You don't know what you don't know, right? And the best thing you do is learn a little bit about some of those things that you don't know, and then rely on the experts for the rest to plug in those gaps.
Great. Well, thanks, Pat, and great, great analogies there. And again, it is so unique, right? And that's the thing. And again, a truck's what, 20 years, depending on where you're at in the country.
Right.
Station is what, about 75 years now is kind of that
Hopefully,
goal.
right? You
So,
aim for
yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a significant investment, in time that you have to make on the front end to save the money and also the hassle. And the analogy too about out of service time. Yeah. Could you imagine a station being down 5 to 6 months a year?
Right.
That would be good news stories for us, but it certainly wouldn't be good for the community and the members. So,
Right.
so thanks for laying that out. And Mike, let's jump over to you. So you've got your session, programming your department for success, laying the foundation for effective station design. Right. So that's again kind of the beginning of the conference. Without this process, you're not going to really be able to understand all the intricacies of what goes on when you design and build a station. So tell us about that class. What are some of the key things that folks will learn, that will ensure that their station is built for long-term durability?
Well, yeah, I've appreciated that the Station Design Conference has had this class. This is kind of one of the main classes that is continuous every conference, because every fire department that comes that has had little experience, maybe it's their first time building a station, maybe they've built a couple, but we have some departments who are getting ready to do a bond program where they're going to build 10. And we get departments all the time coming to us saying, "Hey, we're going to build a station. How big of a site do we need?" And so immediately, as architects, we answer a question with a question. Well, how many apparatus are you going to have in your standard station? If you're doing multiple stations, are they all going to be the same size? Are there one company and two company? But what in the class we will walk through, one, how to get to that answer to the question, but how to get to it with a very informed, as we walk through each piece of the station, and we talk through things like how many bunk rooms are you going to have? What size bunk rooms are they going to be? What goes into each individual bunk room? And then as we look at apparatus here in California, land is very hard to come by, very expensive, and construction is very expensive. And so we ask questions like, as you tell me how many apparatus you need, I'm going to say, does all of that apparatus have to be frontline apparatus, or is some of that reserve that can be moved up later, or maybe it's being in repair? And so we've looked at secondary buildings that aren't. In California, we have the Essential Services Act, which increases because we have lots of earthquakes. We've got to beef up the structure of those stations, and so putting some of those apparatus in a separate building that doesn't have that same requirement saves dollars. And so, how do we help our departments make those all those decisions we make through programming can save big dollars later on? And so, the earlier you make those decisions, the more you can save. And we want to make sure we start with some of the simple questions. How many firefighters are going to be located there? How many apparatus are you going to have? And then we go a little bit more in depth. And in our class, we'll talk both about the process, but we'll give some examples of some one company stations and some two company stations and company stations that have some specialties. Will there be a BC quarters located at that station? Some of the support spaces that station will have, some stations might have and others might not, like SCBA. Are we going to be doing airfill at that station, or is there another station not too far away that's going to be doing airfill? And if we are going to be doing airfill, how many stations are coming to that station to do their airfill? Do we need a separate storage room where they could come in, get the bottles without bothering the other station, and have that with a separate exterior entrance? So those little things all add up at the end of the day. It's going to help the department know how big a one company station that they're designing is going to be. And if you're a department doing multiple stations, we've helped departments do standardization documents that say, here's your one company station, here's your two company station, here's a station, either one of those that has a BC quarters attached. Things like community rooms have become very popular items that cities like to attach to fire stations politically, that can help you raise money for the station because you have this extra community amenity. But what does that do? That impacts parking greatly, how the public comes to the station. So we talk through a lot of those questions and we go space by space. But in our presentation, we're really going to talk about that process and then show examples. And what's wonderful about this conference is, as Pat said, firefighters who are on their design committees, or fire chiefs or battalion chiefs who are there to learn, are shoulder to shoulder, and they get to turn to each other and ask, what are you doing at your department? And as architects, we get to rub shoulders and talk about these different topics that we're talking about. And Pat and I typically are not going to be working on the same projects. He's on the East Coast, I'm on the West Coast. We can freely share our knowledge. And Janet, I want to just say thank you for having this, because this has helped us. And I know it's helped Pat and all the other architects that come and present, provide the most up-to-date technology and information to the fire chiefs throughout the country, because we're here talking with each other. And afterwards, we're all hanging out and talking, what are you seeing over there? What are we seeing over here? And it's just a great mind trust for the collaboration and helping chiefs all across the country. But programming is really that step one, and just to help them understand how big their station needs to be and those special amenities it needs to have.
Thanks. Mike. I just want to say that, the program is broken down into 4 tracks. Track number 1 is the basic for those that are just starting out. And a lot of them are coming in with notebooks with sketches in that. And I noticed that, when I talk to them, they always have their needs. What do we need? What do we need? But we always make sure that the importance of the programming, I didn't quite understand it until I finally sat through part of 1. That to program, the programming is probably one of the key elements of before you move forward in design, even site selection, that moving forward. So I think that's a very valuable program, and that's why we always kind of start out each track with it.
I agree.
Agree.
I think it's a great designing fire stations 101 start off class. It's the first class I think people need to take.
Yeah, there's so much to it, right? And again, it's that checklist that you have, and it's interesting you see more departments. I mean, even here in Fort Worth, they're building a few stations right now. There's a lot of similarities, right? But there still has to be that uniqueness, right? Just based on the amount of land that they've got. Now as they're adding ambulances into some of the stations, they some stations have extra space, some don't. But again, it is unique. And then when you have that department that builds one station every 30, 40, 50 years or greater. Um, all those things that go into it, the things you don't think about. And it's interesting because my conversations, Jan, I'm sure you've all heard that, right? Is there's 50 things that an architect will bring to them that never even came up, right? They use the firehouse day in and day out, but it's such a part of their muscle memory. They wouldn't even factor those things into their design where you're bringing it in and it's like, oh wow, I'm glad we thought about it, right? Like you said, the SCBA and stuff like that. Something as simple as that, where if they're coming back from a car fire at 3 o'clock in the morning, they don't have to wake everybody up, right, in the station, to just have one person run in and change out some bottles. So yeah, again, I think that's kind of the foundation for the event, and that's what I love about this conference too. The way it is laid out, it bookends, but in the middle, it depends on where you're at in your projects and your level of experience that you kind of follow those tracks. So, Jen, I know we spoke about it a little bit before, but again, I want to talk a little bit more about the public safety, right? So, if a department's in the process of building perhaps that public safety complex, or they're looking into potentially adding an EMS room for a third party service, or they're looking to invite the police into the station, to give them a space to work to get out of the elements or whatever it would be. What are some of those factors that you're seeing that are kind of trending on the public safety side of station design?
One of the things that we saw a little bit 7, 8 years ago, just after the conference moved to Firehouse, was that we started to hear about shared facilities. And and that even applied to some of the volunteer departments. They were sharing it. A sheriff's office wanted a spot in their building. But now what we're seeing with the costs going up so significantly in construction and even equipment that goes inside, having a shared building. Now, whether the fire and the police are sharing together, we've seen fire, police, and maybe a village department, a city hall, small scale. But we're starting to see the campuses starting to come about where there will be 2 or 3 different public safety in the same area, particularly for the police and fire. I see that, they are working together more with a lot of the calls that they're getting, the incidents they're responding to, being in the same location. They can share a training facility. They can share a kitchen, an eating area. There's the offices, office area, conference rooms, whatever. They can share that stuff. And building one site is going to save costs versus building 2 sites, 3 sites, whatever. So I see a lot more of that when it comes to saving costs. The other area, a lot of the volunteer departments now, they have to be thinking about going full-time. They have to add full-time staff at some point, or maybe they're going to join with another department. And again, they'll come up with a new facility. But when they add in places for the full-time firefighters coming in, that's gonna require additional space and some other accommodations that are necessary. We're seeing that. The other thing that we're having, and I think Pat's going to talk about it, is the emergency operations centers. Between all of the natural and man-made disasters, it's got to have that focal point, and it's the emergency operations center. And I'm kind of biased. I know probably more about it than I should because my daughter's involved in it. But the Emergency Operations Center will bring together and coordinate the communications, security, whether it's natural, man-made, or a lot of the protests going on, it'll be activated, but it's bringing together fire, law enforcement, public works. It's just expanding. So public safety is all coming together. This year, we're also hearing about dispatch centers. So it's growing and it's expanding. There's a lot going on, and we're trying to bring that into the conference. Each year, we try and add something on innovations or trends.
So it's interesting. This is the 25th anniversary of 9/11 this year, right? And interoperability became that big buzzword after that. Obviously, weapons of mass destruction, hazmat, but interoperability, reached across the board. And interoperability at that point was simply being able to be on the same channel. And 25 years later, a lot of places aren't still able to talk to their neighboring communities or, even the other agencies. But again, if you look at these joint operations centers, the emergency operations centers, I think it's almost, from my perspective, these projects have really helped launch interoperability with, FirstNet in the field, but stations and buildings in general, they've tended to take on that interoperability more than, say, some of the communications areas. And again, I understand, police are encrypted in a lot of places, fire is not, but there's all those aspects that run together there. But I think, on the facilities side, I think that's created some of that interoperability that was never, I don't know if it was ever by design, maybe it was, and Mike and Pat, Janet, you would know better about that, but I think there's been more progress on interoperability when it comes to facilities and getting folks in the same building to at least get those conversations started, which is just fascinating. So again, as we transition station design to fire law, EMS, EOC, and law, it's a great transition point at 25 years in to see where everybody is right now and trying to be on the same page. So, so great work there. I don't know if that was ever the intent, but um, it's good to see that's important. So Pat, you're going to be joined by Dennis Ross for one of your sessions. It's next generation public safety facilities, right? And again, the traditional firehouse where it's just a garage and some living space. It's going to be a high-tech hub here pretty soon, right? And again, you look at some of these shared facilities, they're already at that point with drone as a first responder and some of these other projects that are coming out. So, let's talk about that. Let's talk about what are some of the things that our listeners need to understand about, the fire station of 2030, 2040 and beyond.
Yeah, I think you kind of you're leading right into it with the conversation that you were just sparking, with Janet. I mean, the future of the fire station or police station or combination, it's all of those things, right? It's the interoperability, it's the technology crossing over, it's all sorts of things. And what I find really interesting is that this presentation, we've given this several years in a row, but it's been different every single year because things are changing so rapidly and growing so fast. So I won't spoil all the cool stuff that we're going to include in it. You got to come and see that. But in a nutshell, this presentation, was derived from literally a roundtable discussion with a bunch of architects. Kind of going back to what Mike was saying earlier, we were just having lunch one day at Station Design Conference. It was back in Chicago, a couple of years back in Rosemont, and we were just eating lunch and talking about, in particular, it was electric vehicles. It was electric vehicle apparatus, right? So we were having this conversation about fire protection systems within the fire station. It was like wow, look at all the problems we're having, or the fire service is having with electric vehicles catching fire. How do we put them out? How do we suppress them? How do we make sure they're safe? What happens for that week long afterwards? Is it going to reignite? All these problems that come from it, right? But what about an electric apparatus that's 4 or 5 times the size of the Tesla that was burning? And what about building systems? How long is it going to take for building systems to catch up to this technology? Unfortunately, what happens is the building code takes years and years to catch up to incidents, and unfortunately, it's a catastrophe. It's an incident. It's something that went wrong, horribly wrong in some cases, that influences the code to change. It's very, very rare that it's proactive. It's usually reactive. Yeah. So what this presentation really dives into, or it's one piece of what we dive into in this presentation, is about trying to be more proactive. Look at what's going on around you and try to be proactive. And what that proactiveness does is it helps you future-proof your building. So, for example, your department may not be interested whatsoever in electric vehicle apparatus right now. Okay, great. What about 10 years from now? In 10 years from now, you might have a completely different political group running your city. You might have utilities that are overwhelmed and overburdened. You might have shortages of this or that. So, like, there are outside influences that may force you to go down the road of an electric vehicle apparatus, right? So what does that mean for your station? That means that you're going to have, larger electrical loads. You may have a drone unit. You may have robotic firefighting equipment. You may have other electrified equipment. So now all of a sudden the electric service for your building is twice the size of what it used to be. Well, what does that mean? That means that your electric room is twice the size. Your switchgear might be twice the size. What does that mean? The dominoes are falling. Now all of a sudden your generator, your backup power needs to be significantly larger. Do you have space on site for that? Do you have space within the building for that? When you're paying, and this is true to New York City, like the New York metro area, when you're paying $800 to $1,000 a square foot, or in your California, you're spending $1,000 a square foot for a building, every single square foot costs a lot of money, and there's a lot that goes into it. But that costs even more down the road when you have to renovate and add it on, because today it's $1,000 a square foot. In 10 years, it could be $1,500 a square foot, right? So that's what this presentation is all about. It's investigating, like, what are the big things happening right now. And like I said, every year it's changed, because every year we've had some new technology or new equipment or something that was kind of exciting, that we were able to report on. And then, how does that affect the building design? And it goes, we make sure that this covers all public safety. So this presentation hits on all those types of buildings: fire, law enforcement, public safety, EOC, PSAP, those public safety answering points, because they're all so critical. They're like, this is the socioeconomics of your community. If these buildings are not on par or exceeding those expectations, and if they are not redundant and resilient, then you've got a major trickle down effect on your community when those storms happen. Like Janet said, climate change is 100% real. I'll argue that all the time. We have those fun debates, but the statistics are there, right? The amount of billion dollar damage storms in America has literally gone off the charts over the past decade, right? Compared to years before that. Now, some of it is inflation, the cost of dollar, but the amount of damage is significant. So what do? We're trying not to react. We're trying to be proactive and future-proof and be ready for all of those types of situations. And that's what we're talking about with next generation, public safety facilities.
Hey, Pat, it's the kind of thing, you hear a lot, well, it'll never happen here. You didn't know you guys were going to get 23 inches of snow or whatever, but how does that impact a fire department? I mean, and it's across the country that we see these surprises coming up. It'll never happen here. You just asked for trouble by saying that.
I'll touch on it a little bit later on when we talk about the EOC activations, but the low frequency, high risk category has changed, right? So low frequency, like it'll never happen, or maybe it can happen, but it's a long shot. Very high risk associated with it, right? We still need to take those into account. We need to do risk evaluations and understand what your facility may or may not encounter, and then we have to determine how much do we want to take that into account as far as the design, and how much of your budget is going to go towards protecting against those low frequency, high risk. Yes, every year in the Northeast we get snow, right? But do we always get a blizzard? Apparently, it's only on years that end in 6. But so 1996 when I was a kid, 2016, 2026, we've gotten these big giant blizzards. But lower frequency, right? Maybe every 10 years. But when it happens, it shuts the place down. We can't not have fire stations that are functioning, police stations that are functioning, just because there's 26 inches of snow. We have to be able to account for it.
Yeah, great points. And again, here in Texas, right? When I moved down here, the joke with some of my friends was come to Texas, it never rains. Coming out of Minnesota where it was always cold and snowy and wet. And then we come down here, and I think the first year or the first 5 years I was here, Houston had like six 100-year storms, right? Hurricane Harvey was one of them. But all of a
Yeah.
sudden there was the largest hailstorm. It actually destroyed a police station right down the road from here.
Wow.
Fortunately, I was out of town. My car was, at the airport, so it was safe. But you see that, right? And it's devastating. And we've had the ice storms down here where you are crippled for days. And there's a video I remember it was the first ice storm when I was here, and it was a brush truck ended up hauling two 18-wheelers up and over a flyover because it was shut down the interstate. Now, of course, they were trying to keep people off. But some of the bigger rigs couldn't even get around, right? So we've seen that. So again, is
Yeah.
having that structure, having that facility. They've even looked at how they design apparatus down here after the last few ice storms. A
Hmm.
lot of stuff that was done simply because it's hot in Texas. Well, now all of a sudden we're getting an ice storm every year that cripples the city 4, 5, 6 days, and it's limiting what fire trucks can do, right? So it's that holistic approach to public safety, and that's been fascinating to watch and see the evolution the last few years. Unfortunately, with all these tragedies and these
Yeah.
historic storms that we're seeing. Um, well, Pat, thanks for the insight there, and Mike, I'm going to go back to you, right? And your other program that you're actually co-presenting is supporting firefighter well-being through intentional design, right? I think that's one thing. I think if that's on everybody's checklist, besides having a rapid response, is firefighter health and wellness. And again, these stations have come a long way to really kind of create that environment where you can relax, you can take a breather, and you're not in a moldy room, moldy dark room with dark paint. And I know it's good for sleeping, right? But let's let's talk about that. I mean, how do you design for the firefighters' overall health and wellness?
Well, this is a great example of that collaboration across the country. Years and years ago, one of the architects did a presentation on the hot zone concept. And that influenced all across the country. And ever since then, we've been talking about that and talking about, protecting firefighters from the harmful carcinogens that they face every day in their when they're fighting a fire and when they're bringing it back. And we've seen the instructional videos about how to keep firefighters from bringing that back in that. Um, and we've talked about just different processes. And so that conversation has continued. And in this session, we're gonna look at the evolution of those strategies and how those have been successful and how those have changed over the years to help firefighters from the physical health of what they face. And this has become, as public safety architects, this is synonymous to getting firefighters out the door and to their calls as quickly as possible. Just as important is we want to help firefighters live as long as possible and have healthy lives, both physically. And now the attention has started to shift, and we're recognizing, yes, we want to keep maintaining the physical protection of firefighters, but we also want to recognize that this is a very stressful job, and firefighters and all public safety servants face things in their daily lives that, as an architect, I don't have to face. I don't have to work with somebody on the worst day of their life. Um, we've talked with a lot of um, different public safety people throughout California, whether it's a firefighter, a police officer, a dispatcher. One firefighter I spoke to immediately, I was just touring a firehouse doing a facility assessment, and there was a firefighter there sitting in the kitchen, and I just said, "Hey, we're doing a study. We're really trying to learn about this and help everybody do better in helping firefighters for what you face and being mentally healthy." And he said, and without skipping a beat, he said, 3 weeks ago. I had to respond to a call where there was a child who was killed in an incident. And he said, we have processes for that. I'm still going through that, but that's just a very, very real example of what the people who support us and help us face. And that's something that is not going to go away in a couple of days. And that's something, those of us who have kids immediately think back to our own families. Um, so we are really looking at, and we're going to be talking. I'm hoping this is an open dialogue, which is one of the great things about this conference is, as design professionals, we have ideas but those who are really in the field in all of these different divisions of public safety, we want to help there to be dialogue and hear we're interviewing different departments and finding out what's going on in different departments, and we're looking to share that. Things like the service dog, the kind of the historical Dalmatian that used to be in every fire station. We're now seeing golden retrievers and golden labs. One of the counties here in California has a couple of those dogs that they rotate around to the different fire departments and they rotate to their different dispatch centers. And how do they do that? What's the process of doing that? How does that change, station design or design of a dispatch center? I feel like we've seen a lot of dispatch centers, as Janet and Patrick have mentioned recently, because it's really hard for departments, whether law enforcement or fire, to find dispatchers because that job is very, very stressful. They're answering calls every day of people on their worst day. And so we're seeing some things that we're trying to learn from how we've been designing dispatch centers over the last 10 years that have helped dispatchers, face that stress, places where they can go to retreat and recover. But they still have to be close to if there's more calls coming in, and even just sitting at their desk, making sure they have a cadence of seeing daylight. And they're not just in so many dispatch centers over the years have been these little bunkers, rooms with no windows because we didn't want glare on the TV screens or on the monitors. And we want to make sure they can still get daylight and still have a connection to nature and have, all these things that psychologically architects have learned about in their school, but we're really seeing applying and helping people cope mentally with the stresses that they face. So how do we see those and transition those into the lawn, into the police station, into the firehouse, and how that can help a firefighter or a law enforcement officer coming back from a really tough incident that they need to decompress. And we'll talk about the processes that are just, in place that departments have to help firefighters. Law enforcement for years, if there's a shooting, there's an interview and and a conversation with a psychologist and real discussions to make sure that officer is able to process through that. And as firefighters face those really stressful incidences as well, we're seeing those processes come into the departments. One real advantage is the fire station has a lot of different spaces in it. And I heard one firefighter say, I either go to the gym, or I go to the dining room table and I'm talking with my other firefighters, or I'm, finding some place in nature and something simple for a fire station as saying, hey, we got a firefighter patio. If we spend a few more dollars on making that landscaping in there more nature connective and getting, looking at our daylighting and some things like that, that can really help provide those spaces for firefighters to decompress. But also just really, we want to elevate the discussion because the discussion years ago was looking at health, and we're going to continue that. But we really want this. We really want to make sure firefighters healthy through their whole lives. And so again, we're thankful that this conference is here, and we can just be a part of that dialogue.
Mike, I'm so proud of the fire chiefs that have acknowledged it, but the architects that have embraced, talking about this. We certainly do at the conference, but the stigma that was attached to mental health, I like to think that it's finally starting to, I don't know if it'll ever disappear, but gosh, it's being addressed. And more windows and taking down the signs, the pictures of the horrific fires and stations, all of that adds together. And I have to acknowledge, the architects and people designing stations are really working at it. And I think that's really awesome and so glad to see that.
Yeah, I agree, Janet, that there has been a firefighters have do tough work and tough jobs, and there's been a stigma of being that tough person that can get through it. And we thank them for doing that, but we want to give everybody permission to recognize that they're people and they're humans. And want to help them recognize that we all need someone to talk to and to cope through things. And I'm so thankful that they do what they do. And their job puts them in those situations daily, weekly, that I don't have to be put into quite often. And so we really want to help them be physically and mentally healthy all through their careers.
Yeah, I would agree. I think another analogy. We saw, I've seen in my own, firefighting career go from the days of the salty dog, dirty PPE. If your gear's not dirty, you're not a real firefighter. You haven't done it yet. Like you gotta earn your stripes. You gotta earn that dirt and that salt on your gear. To today where I mean the second we get back from a call, the youngest firefighters and the oldest firefighters are all bagging their equipment, sending their PP out for walk, gear cleaning and everything else, setting up their spares. It's just part of the culture. We did it. We finally did it. Like that culture changed and shifted, and we no longer have to like beat the dead horse about cleaning your PPE. Don't put that dirty helmet on your head. Make sure your hood, is not wrapped around your neck with carcinogens on it. Like we know what the cancer rates are, for firefighters and the increased percentages. So like to Jan's point too, like I'm proud of that. Like we made that cultural shift, and now we're finally getting there with when it comes to mental health and well-being. 100%. There's no longer that stigma, about not being able to talk about your feelings or being upset or being depressed or whatever it is, whatever it's doing to your psyche. We get back from calls. If we need to activate our unit, that comes in with a doctor, they initiate group sessions, they initiate private sessions that you can elect to do after the group session. The group sessions are mandatory in many cases. So the officer in charge of that, of that scene, the OIC, if they activate it, and we had exactly that scenario you were just talking about, Mike. We had an incident, a very horrific car accident, a whole family ranging in various ages, from very, very young infant all the way up to the parents. Some made it, some didn't make it, unfortunately. The second we got back to the firehouse, the counselor was already there waiting for us. They did a group session, and again, having that space in the firehouse, having that area already, as part of the station, we were able to go to that training room that's multi-purpose. We use it for all sorts of things. Have that group session, and then from there, it's voluntary, right? If you want to go and have one-on-one counseling and speak to somebody, you can, and it's not just, I don't want to do it right now. You can call that counselor anytime you want. Maybe it didn't affect you that night because you were still in a little bit of shock, but the next day, you wake up and it's really affecting you. It's just amazing, the cultural shift. When I first joined the fire service 20 years ago, you weren't tough if you didn't have that dirt on your gear, and if you talked about your feelings, like get out of here, kid. You don't know what you're talking. You're not tough enough for this job. Whereas today, here we are, and we're doing it. And a part of it is the education, it's the networking, it's the spreading of the knowledge, and it all happens at conferences like this. And I'm really proud of it too. I think that collectively as a group, whether it's the architects, whether it's the fire chiefs or the police chiefs that are speaking at the conference as well, other industry experts, it's just amazing what everyone is doing together, to just change this whole culture.
And I think across the board, that's the one thing that really stands out about Station Design Conference, right? It's collaborative effort across the board. The The architects are working with the chiefs and the architects, they go meet with a vendor. Everything is essentially, I hate to use it, right? Because maybe it's an architectural pun, but it's an open door. Everybody collaborates in that regard.
Right.
Nobody's out for their own best interest. They're out for the best interest of the attendees, in this regard. But again, it's a collaborative effort, which is just fascinating because of all the conferences I've been to in and out of the fire service, I don't see that level of collaboration anywhere else, but at Station Design. Which again, I think it lends to the fact that it's transitioned from just fire stations in the last 12 years to where it's at. But yeah, on the health and wellness side, I remember my father telling me, or sorry, my brother telling me a story one time. They were trying to find it was a pretty big incident. They had like 13 departments responded. It was a multi-fatal wreck, similar to you, Pat. But they had no place where everybody could gather, right? They ended up getting like the VFW opened up, and they had to break out the old metal chairs. They had to unfold them, and they said it was just like they were so exhausted at that point. Then they had to set up for the meeting. But then they're in this concrete room, which made it worse, right? And so now again, just the way facilities are built. Plus, you have that space if you need to have the one-on-one, you can go off in privacy and be able to you know, get that resource that you need without having to go someplace and being out of pocket. So get great work and thank you to all those involved in that process and seeing how much it's evolved. And again, a lot of it has started at the firehouse level, much like some of this integration across the board with interoperability. Once the stations were built for this, it became a much more where folks became much more comfortable talking about the topic, right? Because again, it's in-house as opposed to having to go out and find something. Um, so we've talked a little bit about the integration back and forth. And Pat, you've got a class, EOC activation readiness and public safety design considerations, right? And again, a lot of it's going from fire or law or EMS to public safety. But how does that fit into the design of a future fire station or public safety campus as everything's evolving?
Yeah, it's the interagency communication and collaboration, right? I think we started to touch on it a little bit earlier. These mission critical facilities are facilities that everyone is interacting with. No matter what agency you're part of, you're interacting with it at some point and in some way, shape, or form. Um, you know, whether it's a large scale event or a small scale event, that EOC is providing some sort of service to you, right? And obviously, different cities and different towns and different states have different ways of setting up these things. And to your point, Pete, sometimes it might be on the same campus. Sometimes it may not be in the same location whatsoever. It might be one central EOC that's handling all of the services in the city. But within that EOC, and as we plan and design them out, we're going through that NIMS structure, right? The incident management structure and how how many desks, how many consoles are going to be required, how many meeting rooms and breakout session rooms are there going to be, how many offices are required, is there a backup PSAP within the EOC, are there bunk rooms, for a long-term large scale event, locker rooms, showers, all those things that keep that EOC, that mission critical facility, in operation throughout the duration of whatever the event is. Again, planned, unplanned events, natural disaster, man-made disaster. There's so many different factors, and you go through that whole risk evaluation ahead of time, and there are a lot of great guidelines out there to help you go through that risk analysis for your entity. And what we do with this presentation is we kind of talk a little bit about that, evaluating risks. We talk about the activation of it. We talk about large scale and small scale EOCs, because lots of times there might be one main EOC over here, but it's good to have some redundancy and other opportunities elsewhere, right? Sometimes you might want the EOC to be located closer to where the events are happening. Sometimes it's better to have that insulation of having it far away from the location of the incident, right? So we talk about a little bit of those kind of design thought process items in this presentation, and and again it's a lot of that low risk, high frequency, and vice versa, and what does that look like? How does that affect? And ultimately, anyone that attends this conference, again, is interacting with an EOC at some some point or another in their operations, right? So I feel like it's a great topic of conversation. It's a great presentation that kind of applies blanket, to all law enforcement, police, public safety, because of the fact that it's kind of that overarching entity, or that overarching type of facility, that mission critical facility that will provide a service, throughout those types of incidents.
I appreciate that. Yeah, again, integration is key at this point. And again, even if you look at some of the grants, I think that's one thing that came out the last few years. Even grants are really forcing that integration, which puts another key role on, and I feel bad because I think sometimes when they go out thinking it's a single use facility, and those
Right.
conversations, hey, if you consider this, you might be eligible for this, that, or the other thing. So I think that's just another thing that when you have these conversations with the station designer, when you're talking with the architects, see how that fits into everything too.
Yeah,
So
grants are huge, and it's interesting. So people ask all the time, right? Oh, are there any grants out there that I can get to help me build this station? You know, Unfortunately, there really are no grants that are just going to pay for your station, right? There are grants that will help you and assist you with certain aspects of building that station. Flip the script a little bit. Mission critical facilities, EOCs, for example, or PSAPs, a little bit different story. There are some grants out there that can be just more universally applied to these types of structures. So I'm building one in Pennsylvania. I won't go into the exact city, but they're building a massive campus. They got an 8-acre site where they're doing law enforcement training, live fire training. They've got a shooting range. They've got a draft pond. They've got a collapse, simulated, collapse zone, for USAR, urban search and rescue, right? So, but in addition to that, they have this EOC, that's going to be on site, and that EOC also has two consoles, two public safety answer point consoles for redundancy, and this location is up the hill, if you will, right? It's up and away from the city a little bit. It's more remote location. It's secured, so like we're seeing, to Janet's point earlier, we're seeing these like combinations of things, right? Like, why would we build a training facility for just the law enforcement side, or just the fire side, when we could take this big piece of land and we can kind of get everything done here? And by the way, the police can train in the in a lot of the structures that the fire department is training in, as long as it's not filthy dirty. And most of these Class B burn buildings are not filthy. There's no ash and soot and things. So
yeah,
they can run their drills in the same structures, in the same buildings in some cases, right? Within reason. And then also like an urban search and rescue drill, you're going to have interagency collaboration anyway, right? So it's like all of this on the same site with an EOC that services everybody, blankets everybody. And oh, hey, we've got the redundancy of the PSAP in there. And oh, hey, we got a great federal grant for this to help us offset $1 million, or X number of dollars. Pretty awesome stuff. So, a good point about the grants, and good points from Janet earlier about, the interagency collaboration. I think I think the funding has been the most, like the biggest driving force for those combination facilities. I think, let's face it, cops and firemen would love to have their own competing facilities. And I had one in Florida tell me recently, our EOC needs to be nicer than the police department. Flat out. It was like, and he was totally serious too. He was like, this has to be better than the police. But, all joking aside, more often than not, they're going to be together because, let's face it, cities can't build the same facility for both or have them be competing. They're the same. They're similar services. They're going to be crossed over, and for logical funding sense, it does work that way.
yeah. Agree. And again, I think, as more folks look at numbers and stuff like that across the board, infrastructure costs are getting higher. Even I think that's all across the board. And, Janet brought it up earlier, so when I moved here, the Bob Bolin Center here in Fort Worth had just opened, right? And it was an old GSA warehouse to begin, and then, they built in their different aspects of it. And it's amazing, every time I go by, whether it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon, on a weekday or on a weekend, there's always somebody there doing something, right? Like, talk about, maximizing the facility. but there's so much that you don't even see inside the buildings, the tactical village, the warehouse simulators that they've got. But ultimately, it was a great opportunity for them to move out of a cramped office, have this massive space. And I think they're very fortunate. And there's been a couple of other campuses around the DFW Metroplex that have echoed it to a degree. But when you have everybody together, and again, it makes that, in Texas lunch is big. I don't know about, the rest of the country, but folks going out for lunch from 11 to like 1, that's how a lot of business gets done. Well, now they can just do it there. They can bring lunch in and just go across the street or go across the little alleyway and collaborate with those other partners in public safety, which is great to see. Um, so as we start to close out, we're not closing out yet, so don't shut off your player. But I just want to go around to each of you and just get one or two tips from your perspective on how to maximize your time at Station Design Conference. Mike, I'm going to start with you. What are one or two things that they can take away today?
Oh, that's a great. Well, there's so many different presentations. Janet and her team does such a great job about making sure there's something for everybody, and that the broad range of topics that are hot today and that are important are there. And so, I guess the one tip would be to really look, and if you've got multiple people going, divide and conquer, get everybody to as many presentations as you can. But really look at the ones, make sure you look at that and make sure you're hitting the ones that are really important to what type of project you're doing. So there might be, she does a great job of spreading them out so things aren't competing too much, but there's so much there, and it's like, it's pun intended, it's like drinking from the fire hose. There's just so much to have, and so if you have more than one person, it's great to get them. And then the second thing would just be, you've got so many design professionals, so many vendors. Get all the free advice you can from everybody, and talk to your other colleagues, people from other departments. Just network and talk and ask as many questions as you possibly can, because everybody is there to help your project and your department be successful. And so just look for opportunities to go out to sit with somebody for lunch, go out to dinner in the evenings. There's lots of different groups out there that are having nice evening activities and things. And so the networking socials, don't miss those. Those are just great to really soak in and get as much information as you can, because it's all there, and it's awesome. And I just echo what Pat said. Thank you, Janet, for keeping this going for decades. And I think I'm super proud. As an architect, like I said, we get to design pretty buildings, but at the end of my career, being a part of what Janet and Patrick and every other design professional and vendor has been a part of with this conference is helping firefighters live longer, be healthier physically, mentally, and having great careers that's really impacting the community. Because when they're doing better, we're all doing better. And so that's just one thing that, as a participant of the conference, they're contributing to that as well, and hopefully they're getting the maximum out of it.
Thanks, Mike. Great advice there. And Pat, how about for you? What do you suggest?
Yeah, I mean, the fact of the matter is, when you go to this conference, you're, for lack of a better term, drinking through a fire hose. I mean, there's so much information, so much knowledge transfer. I think that the tip that I give out most frequently to attendees, and this is throughout the whole conference, but when they come up to our booth, or when we just pass in the hall, and they're just like, you can just see it in their face, they're like, this is great info. Like, I want to do this. I want to do this. Like, I got to bring in this. And we're only one day in. And I'm like, okay, prioritize. You need to prioritize the information that you're taking in. You need to prioritize the information that you gathered as a group when you get back home. You're never going to be able to capture all of it. It's just not possible. There's so much information. So, what I tell people is, there's going to be some limiting factor when you get home as to why you can't accomplish every single thing that you heard about. You may prioritize gender equity. You may prioritize cross-contamination controls. You may prioritize transitioning to electric vehicles and apparatus, or fleet. You may be looking at biophilic design, right? And mental health and well-being. Every one of those things are a 100% major topic, major thing that you should be looking at in some way, shape, or form. can you possibly design a station that accomplishes every single thing that you learned about, every single thing that was suggested by every single architect? No, because space is going to run out, budget's going to run out, um, some other constriction might run out. There might be something politically or building code related that won't allow you to accomplish some of those things, or vice versa. There may be something politically or building code related that's forcing you to accomplish or put something higher on the priority. So what I do is I always recommend try and figure out that priority list. Understand where what are your core goals, core principles that are going into this station or this new station or this renovation or addition or whatever it is you're doing. What are the core values? How can you apply those? And how can you create that list and figure out where that budget's going to go? Because again, you'll drive yourself. I myself have tried to fit every single thing into a station, and I have not yet. I can say without shame, and without any doubt, that I have not been able to work every single detail that I wanted to into every single station. They're all unique. Going back to the initial analogy of the apparatus in the early conversation, they're all unique. Every department is different. Everyone's operations are different. Everyone's strategies and tactics are different. So you're not going to get every one of these concepts, and you're not going to be able to do everything. But try and get as many as you can. Try and prioritize, and try and just make your station the best that it can possibly be to protect your firefighters, protect your law enforcement officers, whatever the type of facility is. Protect those who protect the community is always my first and foremost goal.
Great. Thank you, Pat. Janet, for you, what can you share after running the conference for 20-ish years?
We work very hard to make each conference worthwhile, and for every attendee, whether it's fire, police, chief, project manager, city manager, other architects, and even the exhibitors. We work really hard to make it valuable, make it a resource for you, learn something, and network. I would recommend, if you're coming to the conference, do your homework. It's not going to be a test. Do your homework. Go on the website and look at the programs that are going to be available. Look at the speakers that are going to be presenting them. Pick out the ones, make them a priority that you want to attend. There may be 4 tracks, but you can attend any one of those programs once the general session opens. Pick them out. Network is absolutely invaluable, and everyone, Pat and Pete and Mike have all talked about it, but networking with others. We have attendees from across 50 states, and now we're having international. And don't hesitate to talk to the international visitors that are coming, because they want to learn from you. What are you doing? So take advantage of it. Check it out beforehand, plan your program. It is going to be a lot. And Pat's absolutely right, because I have people coming up to me at the start of the second day, and they're like, I'm overwhelmed. And I'm like, keep taking notes, take a break. But it's just so much, and we want it to be valuable, and we want it to be useful.
Great, Janet, thank you. And what are some of the other classes? I know we've highlighted just a few today, but are there any must-attend classes? And I feel bad putting the conference director in that position to ask, but any other classes that you would recommend that are a must, especially if they're a first-time attendee, to kind of build out that plan?
Well, the pre-conference, we've really packed that with some new topics. We do have 2 programs specifically for volunteer departments, especially kind of a looking forward on that. One of them that I'm excited about is the drones as first responders. There's and its impact on future fire stations. I think that one's going to be a good one. It's a great speaker too. So that one. The other one that we've kind of talked about and is the trauma-informed design. and it's integrating and understanding the high stress professionals and psychological impact. And that one is going to talk about fire law enforcement dispatch centers, EOCs. So it's a new one, and I'm pretty excited about that one. I think it's going to have some real eye-opening information.
Can I throw a few out there too?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um, and I know I'm only throwing this out because I know Janet will agree with this. Um, be there on day one in the morning. So Kenny Newell from Stewart Cooper Newell Architects puts on what I consider to be like the kickoff the kickoff presentation, right? I think he calls it like a strong foundation or something along those lines. You'll see it on the conference website, but he does that presentation first, and he kind of lays the groundwork for the rest of the days and for the rest of the topics. Like he gives like a high level overview and again, building off the name that he uses there, a strong foundation. It's just that it's a foundation for the conference. So I feel like if I could recommend one, that would be a great topic. And then also, and Jenny, you just mentioned the pre-conference a little bit. I would also advocate for the one-on-one pre-conference. If you're able to get there a day early and you're able to bring some of your contingent with you and attend the one-on-ones, it's a really great format that we have. We have 4 firms from around the country, similar to what Mike was mentioning before. We're in 4 different geographies, kind of 4 different corners of the country, and we're just collaborative architects working together to give one-on-one mentorship and guidance, free guidance, in essence, to whatever it is that you're looking at doing, whether it's looking at a site, whether it's looking at a building, whether it's looking, reviewing plans that you've already generated. It could be anything that you want to come in and just speak to some of our really great group of architects. And you can do that. It's one day early. So that would be on Monday, all day Monday. So you come in Sunday night, and then we have a whole program all day Monday for that pre-conference. So in addition to getting that one-on-one mentorship, there are also other additional classes that you can take on Monday, beyond just the normal Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday morning conference as well.
Great. And Pat, with that too, the one-on-one, just make sure the folks listen are aware they do have to pre-register for that.
Right.
You do have to make sure that, you have a spot, because they are, I guess we could say they are technically limited, right? By the number of folks that are there. So.
Yeah, we try not to limit it. We've got a lot of resources, and the pre-registration just allows us to make sure that we've got you accounted for and got the tabletops and everything ready for you. So and you can bring. Janet, I don't think that is it a cost per person, or is it a cost per agency? I don't remember how that's set up.
I think it's per person because it ties in with how many lunches we have to have.
There you go.
That's the only reason we do that, is to make sure everybody gets something to eat.
Yeah, right. We are food driven, in emergency services world.
There's a kitchen in every firehouse, right? So yeah, that's all you know. So all right. Well, yes.
If I could just say one more thing, we
Absolutely.
work really hard to make this a resource. If you're doing the station, I just want people to know that I promise you will not be disappointed if you come to the conference. And everybody that's there at the conference is there to learn the same thing, and there's some. So
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more with that. You will. If I could give any sort of guarantee, and back it with something more than just my word, I would. You will not be disappointed attending this conference. It is the cream of the crop.
Agreed.
And
100%.
just to drive that point home, is you're not just talking to professionals or exhibitors that are for your little area. You're hearing from people all over the country. I would just wholeheartedly agree. You're going to get information that is from everybody, and you're going to hear a lot of design professionals saying some of the things we're going to be saying a lot of the same things about, that's going to help you bring those topics home and really drive those home in your department.
Folks, thanks. Thank you so much for joining today. Again, this is a lot of great information. FHStationDesign.com is the website. Again, if you do want to do the one-on-one, that's May 18th. That does require pre-registration, so just make sure you, even if you've already registered, you can still opt in to do that as well. But Mike Scott, Pat Stone, and Janet Wilmoth, thanks again for joining us today, and we will see you in just about 2 months in Reno. So we do have articles from everybody here as well. So on the podcast player page, we'll put some links to their articles, their bio pages, and any other contributions they might have made. And we'll also have a link to the Station Design Conference as well. So all the folks listening today, thank you so much. And hopefully we'll see many of you at Station Design in 2 months. Thank you.
I'm Pat.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Firehouse Yak podcast from firehouse.com, which is produced by Endeavor Business Media, a division of Endeavor B2B. For more conversations, visit firehouse.com/podcast, where you can find all the shows as well as the show notes from each podcast. Or you can find us on all major podcast platforms. Stay safe, stay educated, and keep on training. Visit firehouse.com for the latest fire service news, training, and more. See you on the next one.